Welcome. So today I'm going to talk about Juniper's groups. Juniper, Juniper groups is similar in my instance to Cisco's macro. Those of you who know what a Cisco macro is, it's just a convenient way of standardizing a group of commands that can be used multiple times. The way I'm going to use the groups, or the way I've been using it, is to group configuration. So if you compare a Cisco macro of grouping your configuration rather than just commands. So like if you use it to say to set an interface, you can group that configuration to set an interface. And that's the way I'm going to use it on Juniper today. So if we get started, show groups. Oh, sorry, I got set groups. Show groups. I have nothing. So if you set groups question mark, it's asking you to set a group name. Now, when I normally set a group name, whoops, didn't carry away there. I tend to name it different to configuration out of this setup, this schema. So for instance, if you've got the VLAN, which you'll need to set, you'd want to name the group different to the way the VLAN's set. So if you made a global change to change some configuration, it wouldn't have any impact on, say, the VLAN, and then potentially cause errors further on down the line. So at least if it's kept within, say, groups or within that schema, then you'll be okay. So if you hit question mark, it says, okay, what do you want to do next for this group? So basically, I'm going to be using it to set an interface. So here, set interfaces. But for the time being, just for the purpose of this, we'll just set groups. So all that's done is set a group name. So we'll do show groups. You've just set a name, but there's nothing underneath it. So if you applied that to your interfaces, it will get you nowhere. So set groups. So we got to call it anytime you want to add anything to an existing group, you got to make sure you call up the group name, and it has to be the same, because if it's case sensitive. So if you were to make a typo and set the, I don't know, P import to lowercase, it would set a whole new group, and it will cause errors for, well, conflict, because you'll be like, well, I just made this and then nothing's working. So now interfaces, then basically interface name. So this is a bit of, say, regex. You're saying you want every GE port, oops, and anything underneath that, after that. So every GE port, we want to set the description and tab to autocomplete. So I'll set the description slightly different to the group name. So it's sales VLAN, fat fingered again, 30 user port. Unit 0. I like to hard code the Ethernet switch in. Interface mode, by default, it's normally set to access, but then at least if it's in the configuration, a user can see it and they know that it should be an access. So I'll enter that. I mean, I could continue writing a whole load of commands, but just to make it easier. And then if we do a show groups again, I've now set the description to sales VLAN 30, user port, unit 0 is now, we've set it to Ethernet switching with the interface mode as access. So now we want to set the VLAN. So if we hit up, delete back to Ethernet switching and then type in VLAN members. I like to put the ID rather than the VLAN name, because if you change the name but you don't change it elsewhere in your configuration, it has an impact. Whereas if you've got the same ID but you've changed the name, it will still work regardless. I mean, obviously we're setting this up to have a standard, but if you've got a slightly different standard and the ID is the same but the naming convention is slightly different for your VLAN, it's going to break. So VLAN members 30, and then I'll set a recovery timeout in case. This is just for an example. So this will be 5 minutes. If you've got anything which will shut down your port, the port will recover. This is just an example. I'm not saying anything, any other configuration outside of this to kind of shut anything down, but here we go. So this will be our final group configuration that we'll be using. So it's sales V, the name of the group, interfaces, G, there. So that's all set. So how do we apply it to an interface? So if we do say interfaces, take for instance, let me just show you, there's nothing underneath my interfaces configuration right now. No configuration. So if we do set interfaces, G, and let me just show you, there's no descriptions either. Run show interfaces description. There's no descriptions. So we know that's all clear. It's got no configuration whatsoever. So if we do set interfaces G000 question mark, what can we do? So we could go in and put our description in, unit 0 family Ethernet switching, but we don't want to do that. We want to inherit this configuration onto the port. How do we do that? We use apply groups. Apply groups, as it says on the can, basically it will apply the groups from which you inherit the configuration data. So if we do apply groups, question mark, what can we do? We can enter the name. So where it says value, that's just a single name, or you can have a list. So if you use the square brackets, you can have a list. So if you've got more advanced configuration, you can list more than one group to inherit configuration. But in this instance, we're just using one. But if you notice, it doesn't set or list any of the names, and it doesn't autocomplete either. So if I do cells trying to hit tab, it's not going to do anything. So to prevent any errors, I'm going to copy that down there, and that's done. So if we do show interfaces, that's applied. Descriptions, nothing at the moment because it's not been saved, it's not been committed. But we can, at this moment in time, we can actually see how the configuration has been inherited. And how do you do that? You do a show interfaces. We will just call up the port, and then you use your pipe display inheritance. What does that do? Pulls up all the configuration which you've just applied and inherited so that we know it's working. So prior to committing any configuration, we know that this has all been inherited. Here's the group name or the configuration. So if you've got any conflicts, you know what group is coming from. But because we started off with no configuration on the port, there's going to be no conflicts. One thing to note is here we have a dependency, VLAN 30. I haven't set that. Show VLANs. So if you've got any dependencies outside of the configuration, to prevent any errors coming when you go to commit, it's best to set your dependencies up as well. So set VLANs. How am I going to name this? So I'm going to name this as I will do sales VLAN. So sales VLAN is called 30. So then give it the VLAN ID of 30. And that should be it. So now we pretty much have a full configuration to make this work because there's no other dependencies within groups. That was pretty much the only dependency, so that'll work. So if we do a show pipe compare, we can check all the configuration which we will be applying. So if you want to check everything's going to be okay, commit check. This is an SRX 300, it's a little slow on doing its checks and committing, so it takes a little bit of a while. But it's all throw up any errors if something's out of place. So it's a good check to do. Or you could do commit and then wait for that. So if you want to commit straight away, you can, but I just want to prove that this works. So it's going through all its checks and it succeeds. So now next step is basically you can commit, or for the more cautious, if you're in a live environment, commit confirmed if you're making any changes, which automatically rolls back. But in this scenario, I'm just going to commit because it's all new. There's nothing there, no impact. So again, I got to wait. But while we wait, so the convenience of having this group now. So if I want to configure, which I'll show you afterwards, say another 5 ports, I can apply this in one swift move now. So everything's there, foundation's there. I can apply the groups to the other, let's say another 4 ports. I'll apply that, save that, and we'll see that within a matter of less than a minute, the changes. So we'll wait for this to finish committing, and I'll show you that we'll be able to see the description has been, when you do a show interface description, run show interface description, you'll see that it's now been inherited. So there we have it. I've got nothing connected on the port. I'm not trunking anything, but you now know that's there. And as I said, you can't see anything, but everything's there. So we want to, so show interfaces, that's all we had. So those of you that know, wildcard range, set interfaces, G, and we'll do another, whoops, 4 ports, another 3, 4, apply groups, and we'll copy that group again in there, show interfaces. What did I do? Oh, I took the description. Okay, so it's always good to check. So we'll delete that. Because we don't want that. Just make sure that's back to set. Okay. Then I will make sure I get the right group name, which is that. If you notice, it's got user port there. So that's to avoid any conflicts, and see how quick that kind of threw up an error. So now we have sales VLAN, and we'll do our show interfaces. So that's good. And if I do a quick check, interfaces description, you can see start that again. Just the one port. We'll commit. Okay, so as you can see, I mean, as it's committing, we can see that the configuration's a lot more cleaner. I mean, rather than having, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 lines of configuration, we've pretty much just got the 2 lines, or 1 line if you want to call it that, underneath the port. So it's way more cleaner, minimizes the kind of lines of code that you output, but then it's easy to troubleshoot. So if I want to make a change, I just change the groups. So now if we do a show, and it was as easy as that. I mean, this is an SRX 300, so it's a bit slow on committing, but on some of the switches I've used, this change will take a couple minutes. You now know that you've got standard configuration, and it's very easy to kind of troubleshoot and apply. I've actually used this on my Genja web app, which I have. So if when you make it to the end of the configuration, when you use the demo, you'll see that I've used the groups. So I mean, this is a good explanation as to why and the thought process. So I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, until the next time, thanks.